Yes, I'm going to talk a little bit about these energy indicators that you have and how I would go about measuring them. I'll give a little introduction to IRENA first. Some people may not know who we are, and then I'll go through some of the calculations. I'll try to make it as easy as possible. Um, First of all, IRENA is the International Renewable Energy Agency. We've been around for about 10 years. We are headquartered in Abu Dhabi, but we also have an office in Bonn and a representative at the United Nations in New York. We have nearly global membership now. We are an intergovernmental organization. We're not a UN specialized agency, but we're about as close to that as possible. We follow the UN Common System rules, and we support countries, our members, in their transition to a sustainable energy future. We do four main areas of activities: international cooperation. For example, our IRENA Council has just finished meeting yesterday. People come together and share experiences and discuss developments. Our office in Bonn is full of engineers, and they give a lot of technology advice about how to use renewables and new and emerging trends in technology. The division I was in until I retired last year, I'm a consultant now, but I was the head of statistics, is policy, finance, and statistics. So that's sharing knowledge, generating and sharing knowledge with countries. And then we have a country engagement and support team, which works more closely with countries. And the one that's been doing a little work on tourism, it's not a major focus for us, but the one that's been doing a little work is our SIDS team working in small island developing states. I'll just put this slide up for the reference. If people want to look at this, they can later. I'll not go into a lot of detail, but we have a unit that works with all of the SIDS and a number of many partners, I think, who are also members of the WTO. And we're looking at how to address elements of the energy transition and sustainable energy development in SIDS, where, of course, climate change and renewable energy are very important issues. I think Cordula already put these two references up, but the two main things that we've done so far on renewable energy in tourism is looking at the different opportunities for renewable energy in tourism ventures. And we've started to work with some countries on energy management. In the statistics team where I am, we produce statistics, we produce technical manuals on how to measure things. We have online statistics for people that can download, and of course we produce books as well. All of our data is comprehensive. It covers every country in the world, every renewable technology. It's available back to the year 2000, and it's all freely available. And then we also give advice to countries and institutions about how to collect and manage renewable energy data. So I will now go on to that topic. If you're measuring energy statistics in a country or in a sector, there are three main factors to consider. The first of all is the scope or the boundaries of what you're going to count. What is included as energy and what is not included as energy, and what is included as energy use in your sector. There's then the, so what's in or out. The second one is, of course, the topic of how to actually collect and measure energy use, and then what to count it as in the terms of the indicators. You have the major classification issue is it renewable or not renewable? And then, of course, there's reporting. To use this information, we have to convert it into a common unit because diesel is measured in liters, coal in tons, wind power in kilowatt hours. So we convert all of that to energy units, which is a little daunting for many people, but it's not really too difficult. And then, of course, there's the construction of the indicators. I'll talk mostly about the two indicators that you have on energy consumption per person and then the renewable share. So I'll now go into a little more detail on these topics. To be counted as energy use, the energy has to be actively produced. So a solar water heater on the roof of a hotel is counted as energy production because it's there specifically for the production of energy. A greenhouse also uses solar energy to grow plants, but we wouldn't count that because it's not for energy production. There's an interesting one that's been coming up in the energy world about geothermal energy in resorts, which is tourism related, where they have, for example, volcanic springs. Is that energy, can that energy be counted as energy? Well, not really, I don't think, because the purpose of the resort is to use the volcanic water. If the water wasn't hot from the volcano, you probably wouldn't heat the swimming pool in the absence of that. In fact, you might not even have the resort, so that probably doesn't count. However, if you were to pump that hot water into the building to heat the building, then it probably does fall within scope. So there's some tricky issues here. The energy has to be measurable. Wind power can be measured, it's kilowatt hours. Windmills can't be measured. Water mills can't be measured. Technically, clothes on a washing line drying in the wind, that's the use of renewable energy, but it's not measured. We include heat, which is usually the heat content of fuels that are burned, and we include electricity, but we do not count cooling. Although there are ways of using renewables to improve cooling, for example, a good tourism-related one is the hotel in Victoria Harbour, Hong Kong, that pumps up seawater. It's very cold and it uses it for its air conditioning. We don't count that as renewable energy, although it still comes up in the energy measures, because instead of using a lot of electricity for air conditioners, they're now using a little electricity for pumping this seawater. So it still shows up as an improvement. And then for consumption, we measure final consumption and not the original or primary energy sources. Nobody consumes crude oil, they consume petrol, gasoline, kerosene, things like that. In the tourism sphere, if you're looking at destinations or establishments, the interesting thing about this is if a destination has a diesel generator, the diesel going into it doesn't count as the energy consumption. The electricity coming out would be fossil fuel electricity consumption, and that would count as consumption. And it does make a difference, because the energy units, it's about 3 units of diesel energy going to making 1 unit of fossil fuel electricity. So it's important. In terms of sectoral scope, energy statistics are defined by sectors, and the tourism sector is defined in the International Standard Industrial Classification. There is a boundary to it. Transport, air travel is a different thing. It's not part of the tourism sector. If you want to measure those direct impacts or life cycle, we're talking about construction and things, that's fine, but that's a very different issue. Strictly speaking, consumption of energy in the tourism sector is consumption of energy within resorts, destinations, tourism companies, however they're defined in this classification. Geographical scope, you only count what's consumed within the territorial boundary. I think that can be also established, converted to the establishment. So if you have a hotel that's running buses to the airport, strictly speaking, that fuel is consumed outside the boundary of the establishment. If you think of the business as the boundary, then you might want to include it. But then it gets tricky, because if the hotel runs its own buses, it gets counted. If the hotel contracts out that bus service, you wouldn't count it. So it's a little tricky again. And then the other tricky thing is if the renewable share of power, when you consume electricity, some of that electricity has been generated from renewable generation. Basically, this share is available in IRENA statistics, and if an establishment is using renewable electricity from electricity from the grid, a share of that is going to be renewable, and it should be counted as such. Right, data collection. Basically, consumption in a year of the following. This is what should be collected: electricity or heat, if there's district heating. Fuels, as I said, excluding any fuels for electricity generation on site. And then there are these 3 natural sources of renewable heat: solar heat, geothermal heat, and ambient heat. They're a little tricky to measure, but I'll just, next couple of slides, show how to do this. Most of the data is available from purchasing records or metering, but as I say, some of it is estimated, particularly these latter products. These things are usually measured in physical units, tons, liters, kilowatt hours, rather than energy units, which is joules. So there's a conversion process to add everything up in the same units at the end. in terms of what's renewable, what's non-renewable, if an establishment is using fossil fuels, that's counted, it's consumption, it's non-renewable. If they're using renewables directly, bioenergy, liquid solids, biogas, or some of these types of heat, that's non-renewable. That is basically how the renewable, non-renewable share is done. But then in addition to this, of course, a lot of places use a lot of electricity, possibly also some district heating. And the share of that that can be counted as renewable will depend on where it comes from. And I'll have a little example of that. So estimating the difficult items. Solar energy is one of them. Quite often there are places have solar panels on the roof. These aren't metered. They're used directly within the building. But nobody's metering it. So what's the generation? To be honest, the best way of doing this is to go to the Global Solar Atlas. I've got an example here, it's the web address, and it will tell you what the output of a typical 1 kilowatt of solar panels will generate per year. And that, of course, is then renewable. You can see the specific photovoltaic power output. We use this a lot to make estimations for countries where we don't have data. It's often easier to measure the capacity of something, the kilowatts of panels, than the actual generation. We have the same thing for solar water heaters. Nobody is measuring the heat that comes out of these things. It's all estimated. And there is an internationally agreed conversion factor based on the area of the solar water heaters, how to turn that into the amount of thermal energy that's produced. It's based on this global horizontal irradiation, which is also shown in that solar atlas table. So for example, a solar water heater, 2 square meters in Madrid, that's the calculation down there of its thermal output per year. The difference between the collectors, basically an unglazed collector is kind of a black panel that's used for swimming pools. It's not glazed. Glazed collectors are the typical solar water heaters. And then there's also solar water heaters that are used for space heating that apparently for some reason, I don't know why, don't produce quite as much energy as the ones just for hot water. Heat pumps are horribly complicated. I will quickly go through this. A heat pump works basically like an air conditioner or a fridge, but in reverse. It pumps heat from the outside of a building into the building, or for use as water heater. It's estimated based on its capacity, the number of hours it's used, and then this renewable share is based on its performance factor. Heat pumps are very clever devices. If you use 1 unit of electricity to run the pump, you will end up with a lot more than 1 unit of thermal heat. And that's this SPS. You can see, for example, in Madrid, aerothermal energy, air to air, the default values, this is given by Eurostat for the way that the Eurostat statisticians estimate this. Typically, an air-sourced heat pump in Madrid would operate for about 1,200 hours a year with a performance factor of 2.7. So if you had a 10 kilowatt thermal air heat pump, that's its thermal output, it's producing 12,000 kilowatts of thermal heat. It consumes 1 over 2.7, 4,400 kilowatt hours of electricity. You don't need to count that because you count that already as your electricity consumption. The heat is the difference. That renewable heat is what you have pumped inside the building, in addition to the heat that's produced from the electricity, 7,600, and you can count that as renewable heat. Other measurement issues, as I said, the renewable share of electricity use is tricky, especially if you have some solar panels. If you have solar panels and grid electricity, there's a little calculation here. For example, in Madrid, with 15 kilowatts of solar panels, 20,000 kilowatt hours of grid consumption, your self-generation is renewable. That's the number from Madrid multiplied by 15. That gives you that number. The renewable energy from the grid, that's the 20,000 kilowatt hours. Spain's electricity generation is 37% renewable. So there's your renewable electricity from the grid. The remainder is non-renewable. If you're using liquid fuels, you have to be aware that there could be a renewable component automatically built in. There was a time when people will buy E5 or E10 or E25. This is the volumetric content of a biofuel. Now, most people just buy diesel, and what they may not realize is that there is already a mandated minimum biofuel content in that. So if resorts are using these fuels, they are also using a renewable component. And the other final thing is you need to be careful with solid biofuels. If you're buying fuel wood, basically you have to be careful how it's measured. And also the moisture is an issue in terms of its energy content, because wet wood doesn't burn as well as dry wood. Um, Conversion to the energy units, you have to take all of these different things in tons and liters and whatever, kilowatt hours, and convert it all into some version of joules, megajoules, gigajoules, whatever. The calculations, the standard UN approved conversion factors are there. They do vary, but if you want to use the defaults, they're there. Of course, if things are measured in liters, then you have to convert liters to tons, because, or kilograms, because that's what's given there. Now, I think I maybe have a little more time. I just wanted to show you, it all sounds very daunting, but then I sat down yesterday lunchtime with my wife and I said, how much energy do we use? And it took me about 15 minutes to calculate all of this. Of course, I do these calculations in my sleep, but I wanted to show you it's not that daunting. There's some electricity use. We looked at our electricity bills. I looked at the RE share at 20% in France. We can get the electricity, RE, non-RE. I included our car, although strictly speaking, I said it could be considered outside boundary. Basically, 10% of fuels in France are renewable, so it's split up. We use gardening equipment. I imagine a lot of tourism ventures do, with lawn cutting and things. There's a little bit of gardening fuel use. Heating oil, we purchase wood and we have our own wood as well. Here's the tricky thing: when you purchase it stacked, it's not a true cubic meter. It's real cubic meter is about 60%. And then also you have to convert it to tons. Then we use a little bit of LPG for cooking. We don't use bio LPG, although that is available. And we use a little charcoal, and we put it all in this table. We take the net calorific values, we multiply it all together, and we get the answer. I was a little disappointed to find out that my household is not over 50% renewable. It's our energy use is 44%. But the interesting thing as well is looking at the different types of uses. I can see that my biggest use of energy is heating oil. We're planning on getting a wood burner, a wood burning stove, so that will hopefully help with that, get a bit more in the renewable column, possibly reduce some of the electricity consumption if my wife uses it for baking. I suspect a lot of our electricity is for the cooker. And then if you want consumption per person night or per bed night, there are 3 of us here, my wife, myself, and my daughter. You add those 2 numbers together, divide it by 3 times 365, 171 megajoules. So I hope that's a very rapid tour as to how to possibly do this. And I hope people found that useful and interesting. Thank you.